Everybody says that recessions are completely unpredictable and they're impossible to foresee. But did you know there's actually common factors that you can look at to predict a recession? So in this video, I'm going to give you the 7 leading indicators that are going to help you to predict a recession. And most importantly, at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you which indicators are most likely going to lead us into the next recession. Hi, I'm Matt Janino. I teach you how to make money, grow money, and invest money. And I hear people all the time saying the same exact thing, that the stock market is completely random and it's a gamble. You don't know if it's going to go up or if it's going to go down. Same thing with recessions. You can't predict a recession. It's something you will not see coming, and when it hits you, it's going to be too late. But that's all false, because I myself in my premium group, where I trade with others, have given 18 trades in the past 2 months, and 14 of them have been profitable. So how does somebody take something like the stock market, which is completely random, and have profitable trades in a long period of time? And how do people predict a housing crash years before it actually happened? Take, for example, The Big Short. I'm sure you've seen that movie. That's actually a true story. People have made millions of dollars predicting that housing crash. So all these completely random events actually aren't as random as people think they are, because of these things called leading indicators. So in this video, I'm going to tell you the 7 leading indicators that can help you predict the next stock market recession. And the first indicator I want to talk about is consumer sentiment. So this is basically what everybody feels about the general economy. It's kind of like a poll and how confident we are in the economy and in the stock market. And this is good to look at on a graph. So the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index is something that's plotted every month, every day. So you can see real time how our nation feels about our own economy, the people inside it. And the reason this is important is because if consumer sentiment is low, then people are less likely to put their money in the stock market, because maybe they're worried, maybe they don't believe in the economy right now, maybe their job is not secure. In that case, they're going to be putting money towards bonds, saving accounts, and unfortunately, some people will put it under their mattresses. During this time, money is not flowing into the market, we're not making new highs, and we're not getting that fuel in the bull market. When consumer sentiment is low, that is what fuels the recession, and that is kind of what feeds into it. Just a pro tip on the consumer sentiment index: when it's at all-time highs compared to the past, that's a good time to sell. And when it's at all-time lows compared to the past, that's a good time to buy, because people are either too fearful or they're too greedy, and at that point you have to play kind of the extremes. And leading indicator number 2 is inflation. But inflation basically is the amount your buying power is decreasing each year. So inflation is anywhere between 1 and sometimes 10%. So every year your dollar is worth 1 to 10% less, meaning you can go out in the market and buy less every year with your dollar. And what this looks like to you, the consumer, is the price of toothpaste might increase, or maybe oil increases. So that is inflation in a nutshell. And a trade war is just going to fuel inflation, because we can't get cheaper products anymore. So that's one fear I see in the market today, is a trade war sparking inflation. So inflation is something that is a precursor to a recession. As you can see from the graph I'm putting up now, every time inflation spikes, we see a recession happen shortly after. Look at 2007. We had inflation around 6%. So that means if the market makes 6% that year and inflation is at 6%, you're really not making anything, because although your money is 6% more valuable, your money just got 6% less valuable from inflation. But the good thing right now is, as you can see from this graph, is inflation is historically low at 3%. But if we see it pop to 3, 4, or even 5% from here, that would make me worried for the next possible recession. And the scary thing with inflation is the only way to lower inflation is by raising interest rates. So interest rates are actually going to be our 3rd leading indicator for what can cause a recession. And interest rates are super important, because the higher they are, the less the economy can borrow, because they're going to have to pay more for their interest payment each month. So when interest rates are low, that's the best fuel for the economy. When you see the Feds increasing interest rates, that's usually a sign that they want to slow down the economy. So there's two important things you want to understand with interest rates. First off, where are the interest rates? And then number two, where's the direction they're going? Because if the Fed keeps increasing them, that's usually a sign that the economy is going to slow down. But if interest rates are low, that's a high growth environment for the overall economy. And when interest rates are high, that's usually not the best place for the economy to grow long term. Let me show you a graph of how the Fed increased interest rates too aggressively and caused many recessions from that. You can see in the 1980s, we increased interest rates from 10 to 20% and a recession hit shortly after. So that gray shaded part is the recession. And then we fast forward to 1990, we see interest rates go from 8 to 10%, causing a recession shortly after. Then in 2007, we go from 6 to 8%, causing a recession shortly after. And then here we are in 2019 with the lowest interest rates we've ever had in history. Like I said before, is the best growth environment for the economy. But you do see in the past couple years, interest rates have been slowly climbing. So this could be a precursor to the next recession because the Feds may have been raising them too aggressively. But the scary fact is that interest rates are so low that if we ever experience a recession, we will not be able to bail ourselves out as easily because interest rates are so low. If we go to zero, where do we go from there? I just want to harp on one more fact, that the higher the interest rates are, the less overall consumers can borrow. If a regular man or woman cannot borrow as much, that means they are not going to be spending as much to buy a car, they're not going to be able to buy as much house, and then corporations cannot invest and grow as quickly when interest rates are high. They might not be able to invest in R&D, manufacturing, increase salaries. If interest rates are low, they can do all of this. This leads us to the fourth leading indicator for recessions. This is consumer debt, which is actually trackable, and I will show you a graph on this in a second. But first, once somebody defaults on their first payment of debt, let's say credit card bills, then it's going to roll over to their car payment and then their house. And as you can see, debt defaults are a domino effect that can affect every industry, unfortunately. And I'm not going to put the blame on the consumers because corporations are just as much liable to fall on this debt domino too. So it's important to track how leveraged we are as an economy and how leveraged we are as a consumer. Check out this graph right here. It's just showing you the percent that we are putting our money into debt. Right now, the consumer is leveraged for about 80%, and this is not as high as we had been back in 2007 before the housing crash. We were at 98% leveraged. So that means every dollar the consumer made, they had to pay towards debt payments. That's not a safe place to be. And I'm going to admit right now, 80% is still very high. So this is definitely a place where we can experience some tremendous losses, where we can experience many defaults if anything goes bad in the economy, because 80% with debt is still very high in my opinion compared to the past if you look at it. So debt is definitely a leading indicator for what can cause a recession, and it's going to affect every industry once someone starts defaulting on one form of debt. And then leading indicator number 5 is consumer spending, which is actually very interesting because spending is what fuels the economy, and when the consumer cannot spend as much, the economy is not going to do as well. So this is why inflation and interest rates can lower the amount of spending that happens. So an extra $100 for the consumer to spend is going to help that restaurant down the road stay in business, or maybe it's going to help them buy that new TV. But if they don't have that extra $100, that restaurant's going out of business. They're not buying that TV from Walmart. That's going to affect Walmart's earnings. So you can kind of get the picture of how less money for the consumer is going to affect the overall economy. And there's a lot of ways consumer spending can get smaller and smaller. But the point I want you to understand here is that the consumers fuel the economy as well as the corporations. That leads us to number 6, corporation spending. That also fuels the whole economy because how do you think those consumers get salaries? probably from their corporation jobs. And if the corporations aren't doing as well, they're going to start laying off people, restructuring the business, spending less money on manufacturing plants, which is going to result in less jobs in that area. And you can kind of see how that affects the consumer and how that's going to affect how much the consumer can spend. And that's where the snowball begins, and that's where the economy gets worse and worse and less healthy. And lastly, the seventh leading indicator for recession is unemployment. So we all have to know what the unemployment numbers are at any given moment in time, because employed people are what fuel corporations. And like I said, corporations pretty much fuel the whole process on how the world economy runs in that circular motion. And if corporations aren't hiring people and people aren't spending money, it's going to be another domino effect that's going to negatively affect the economy. So right now, currently, we have the lowest unemployment in history, meaning our economy is probably running on all cylinders. How can we do better than basically employing everyone possible? We don't have any more workers at this point. So how does the economy make more products? How does the economy have more software sales? I think you understand what I'm saying here. So when unemployment is historically low, that is usually a sign that the economy can't do much better, but not really a sign that the economy is going to go straight into recession. When the unemployment is very high, that's a great sign that we're probably in a recession, or we're going to head into one pretty soon. So as promised, now I'm going to talk about which factors I'm most worried about that can affect our economy negatively, possibly lead us in a recession. So I'm going to go through all of them and talk about which ones are the most important. Starting with number one, consumer sentiment, how the general population feels about the economy and the stock market. Right now, we have been barely able to get above that $100 level, like I showed you in that graph. And if we cannot have consumer sentiment following the stock market movements, then we're not going to see money going into the market. So I see this being a leading factor on having the next recession come relatively soon. Number two is inflation, and this is something I'm actually not worried about because inflation is historically low at 2.4% right now. That just means that the dollar that the consumer is spending every year is less powerful as it could be, if it makes sense, because when inflation is 6%, the consumer can really feel the effect of not being able to spend as much at the grocery store. But with 2.4%, we really don't feel that. So that's not an indicator I'm worried about right now. That leads us to number three, interest rates, which are historically low, which does not concern me either because they are still fueling the economy to borrow money and do well. But the one thing that does worry me is the rate at which the feds are raising those interest rates. That is something that does not look good to me personally, and that is something I'm watching to see if they're going to keep raising those rates, because if we hit 3 or 4% in the next couple of years, I do think we're going to see that recession come. So I'm mostly worried about how fast we're raising interest rates from the Fed side. Leading indicator number 4 is consumer debt, and right now we're at very high levels, 80% of what the consumer has. Like I said in this video, still too high for me to be comfortable with. And if one domino effect happens where one default payment on a car occurs, then you're going to see that affect houses and then credit cards, and that's going to affect the overall economy very quickly. Number 5 is consumer spending, and number 6 is corporate spending, and I'm not too worried about these because these are really related to interest rates and inflation, and right now those are very low, so we can spend a lot of money currently in the economy. And then the last thing is that unemployment rate, which I am very, very worried about because we have no way to fuel the economy with more workers right now. We have the lowest unemployment rate ever in history. So those are all the leading indicators and the ones I'm most concerned about. If you want to watch a video on how to make loads of money in the next recession, please click the video to the right of me. I think you're going to love it. So in this video, I'm going to give you the best investing strategy you can implement in the next recession, and I'm going to tell you how it can make you loads of money.